The 12th lesson, Spiritual Evolution. T. He beautiful doctrine of spiritual evolution. That gem in the diadem of the yogi philosophy is sadly misunderstood and misinterpreted, even by many who are its friends. The mass of uninformed people confuse it with the crudest ideas of the ignorant. Races of Asia and Africa believe that it teaches that the souls of men descend into the bodies of the lower animals after death, and under the guise of high teachings regarding reincarnation, many promulgate theories holding that the soul of man is bound to the will of human rebirth, and must live in body after body whether it will or not until certain great cycles are passed, when the race moves on to another planet. All. A series of lessons in Yogi Philosophy 364. Of these misconceptions, however, are based upon the real truth. They are the truth, but not the whole truth. It is true that the soul of a brutal, selfish, bestial man, after death, will be drawn by the force of its own desires toward rebirth in the body of some of the lower and more beast-like races of man. It has failed in its class work, and has been sent back to a lower grade. But the soul that has once reached the stage of even primitive manhood, never can sink back into the plane of lower animal life. As bestial as it may be, it still has acquired something that the animal lacks, and that something it can never lose. And likewise, although the race as a race must wait until certain periods are reached before it may move onward, yet the individual who has risen beyond the need of immediate rebirth is not compelled to reincarnate as a man of the present stage of development, but may wait until the race catches up to him, as it were, when he may join it in its upward swing, the intervening period. A series of lessons in Yogi Philosophy 365. Being spent either in the higher planes of the astral world or in conscious temporary sojourn in other material spheres, helping in the great work of the evolution of all life. And, so far from the spiritually awakened man being compelled to suffer continuous involuntary rebirths, he is not reborn except with his own consent and desire, and with the continuance of consciousness. This continuance of consciousness depending upon the spiritual attainment reached. Many who read these lines are partially conscious of their past existences in the flesh, and their attraction to the subject is due to that semi-consciousness and recognition of the truth. Others, now in the flesh, have varying degrees of consciousness, reaching, in some cases, a full recollection of their past lives. And, rest assured, dear student, that when you reach a certain stage of spiritual awakening, and you may have reached it even now, you will have left behind you unconscious rebirth, and, after a series of lessons in Yogi Philosophy 366, you have passed out of your present body. And after a period of spiritual rest you will not be reborn, until you are ready and willing. And you will then carry with you a continuous recollection of all that you choose to carry with you into your new life. So cease this fretting about forced rebirth, and stop worrying about your fancied loss of consciousness in future lives. Spiritual attainment is slow and arduous, but every inch gained is so much further on, and you can never slip back, nor lose the slightest part of what you've gained. Even those who are reborn, unconsciously, as are the majority of the race, are not actually reborn against their will or desire. On the contrary, they are reborn because they desire it, because their tastes and desires create longings that only renewed life in the flesh can satisfy, and, although they are not fully conscious of it, they place themselves again within the operation of the law of attraction, and are swept onto a rebirth, in just the surroundings. A series of lessons in Yogi Philosophy 367. Best calculated to enable them to exhaust their desires, and satisfy their longings, these desires and longings thus dying a natural death, and making way for higher ones. So long as people earnestly desire material things, the things of the flesh and the material life, and are not able to divorce themselves from such things at will, just so long will they be drawn toward rebirth, that these desires may be gratified or satisfied. But when one has, by experience in many lives, learned to see things as they are, and to recognize that such things are not a part of his real nature, then the earnest desire grows less and finally dies, and that person escapes from the operation of the law of attraction, and need not undergo rebirth until some higher desire or aspiration is appealed to, as the evolution of the race brings new eras and peoples. It is as if one were to soar away up above the atmosphere of the earth, beyond the sphere of the earth's attraction, and would then wait until the earth revolved beneath him. A series of lessons in Yogi Philosophy 368. And he saw, far below, the spot which he wished to visit, when all he would have to do would be to allow himself to sink until the force of gravity exerted by the earth would draw him to the desired place. The idea of compulsory rebirth is horrible to the mind of the average man, and rightly so. For it violates his intuitive sense of the justice and truth of this great law of life. We are here because we wish to be in obedience to the law of attraction, operating in accordance with our desires and aspiration, yes, often longings after our departure from our last fleshly tenement, and the period of rest which always follows a life. And we will never be anywhere else, or in any other life, unless, by reason of that same law, called into effect. In the same manner, it is quite true, that the period between lives gives us an opportunity to receive the higher knowledge of the Spirit more clearly than when disturbed by material things, but even with this additional aid, are a series of lessons in Yogi Philosophy 369. Desires are often sufficiently strong to cause us to reject the gentle promptings of the Spirit as to what is best for us, just as we do in our everyday lives, and we allow ourselves to be caught up in the current of desire, and are swept onward toward rebirth in such conditions as to allow us to manifest and express those desires and longings. Sometimes, the Spirit's voice influences us to a degree, and we are born in conditions representing a compromise between the Spirit's teaching and the grosser desires, and the result is often a life torn with conflicting desires and restless longings. But all this is a promise of better conditions in the future, when one has developed so far as to be open to the influence of the spiritual mind in his physical life. He may rest assured that his next choice of rebirth will be made with the full approval and wisdom of that higher part of his mind, and the old mistakes will be obviated. A series of lessons in Yogi Philosophy 370. As a general statement of truth, we may say that those who actually feel within them that consciousness of having always existed and a being intended for an endless existence need fear nothing on the score of future unconscious rebirths. They have reached the stage of consciousness in which, henceforth, they will be aware of the whole process of the future incarnations, and will make the change, if they wish to, just as one changes his place of residence, or travels from one country to another. They are delivered from the necessity of the unconscious rebirth, from blind desire, which has been their portion in the past, and which is the lot of the majority of the race. And now, after this long preamble, let us see what spiritual evolution, as taught by the yogis, really means. The yogi philosophy teaches that man has always lived and always will live. That which we call death is but a falling to sleep to awaken the following morning. That death is but a series of lessons in Yogi Philosophy 371. Temporary loss of consciousness. That life is continuous, and that its object is development, growth, unfoldment. That we are in eternity, now as much as we ever can be. That the soul is the real man, and not merely an appendage or attachment to his physical body, as many seem to regard it. That the soul may exist equally well out of the body as in it, although certain experience and knowledge may be obtained only by reason of a physical existence. Hence, that existence, that we have bodies now, just because we need them when we have progressed beyond a certain point, we will not need the kind of bodies we have now, and will be relieved of them. That on the grosser planes of life far more material bodies than ours were occupied by the soul, that on higher planes the soul will occupy finer bodies. That as we live out the experiences of one earth life, we pass out of the body into a state of rest, and after that are reborn into bodies, and into conditions, in accordance with our needs. And a series of lessons in Yogi Philosophy 372. Desires. That the real life is really a succession of lives of rebirths, and that our present life is merely one of a countless number of previous lives, our present self being the result of the experiences gained in our previous existences. The Yogi philosophy teaches that the soul has existed for ages, working its way up through innumerable forms, from lower to higher, always progressing, always unfolding. That it will continue to develop and unfold, through countless ages, in many forms and phases, but always higher and higher. The universe is great and large, and there are countless worlds and spheres for its inhabitants, and we shall not be bound to earth one moment after we are fitted to move on to higher spheres and planes. The yogis teach that while the majority of the race are in the unconscious stage of spiritual evolution, still there are many awakening to the truth, and developing a spiritual consciousness of the real nature and future of man, and that these spiritually awakened people will never